I'm still not I love it.
Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Spies are us, and us in this case is the U.S., and it spies on just about everyone in the world, including its so-called friends and allies. Washington seeks total global information dominance, and this is being done, we're told, to fight terror. Wouldn't it be better if the U.S. monitored its intelligence community rather than snoop on the rest of us? To Crosstalk Global Information Dominance, I'm joined by TJ Walker in New York. He is a syndicated TV commentator. And in London, we cross to Jim Killock. He is the executive director of the Open Rights Group. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Jim, if I can go to you first in London. There's leaks after leak after leak. It shows that the United States is watching quite a few people and collecting data on them, including Europe now. And people are calling the United States big brother, but the Washington elite is just brushing it off, saying business as usual.
Yeah, and I think that's outrageous. I mean, what's happened here is that the United States and the UK, in fact, have taken some loopholes in their law. As they don't. The UK believes it can take data of people when they're communicating overseas. The United States believes it can take whatever it likes if you're not a United States citizen, or there's a greater probability that you're not a United States citizen, and it's then analyzing this data. Data's going into data stores. All kinds of things are going on so that they can analyze and pick at data and see what they might find on a kind of mass trawling expedition. So I think it's pretty outrageous. I don't think it would stand up in Europe in our human rights courts. I think people would very quickly see that you cannot just take everybody's data on the basis that some people might be guilty. That's effectively putting the whole population under suspicion, and that is how you put everyone into feeling that they're watched and put some kind of fear, an atmosphere of fear around everybody, and that has profound consequences for our democracy if people feel that they're under constant surveillance and under constant threat of their private information being abused.
Okay, TJ, I think everyone knows security is important, but are these programs proportionate to the threat?
Well, we don't really know the threat. I mean, everyone has their own bias. I have a bias as an American living in New York City. So from my perspective, I have no worry about the government, the Obama administration, or even a Bush administration coming into my house and killing me. I do have a fear of terrorists. I was a block away from Times Square a couple of years ago when the car bomb almost went off. I was in the streets of Manhattan when the Twin Towers came down. So I, like a lot of Americans, do have a fear of terrorists, and yet there's been no evidence of the Obama administration, or for that matter, the Bush administration, using this data collection to go after innocent Americans or to go after their political opponents.
Okay, but TJ, have they foiled any major terrorist attacks? I mean, they just say, believe us. Do you believe them?
Well, the U.S. government claims that it's foiled 50-some attacks. I mean, yeah. And I don't know for certain. I don't work for the NSA or the United States government. But we haven't had any major successful attacks since 9/11. That doesn't mean it foiled it, but you can't prove the opposite by just saying you don't know either.
Okay, Jim, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, you know, we don't know what the governments are doing, but we do know that when intelligence works, it tends to be through human intelligence. Some governments use these kinds of intrusive surveillance and others don't. But there isn't a sort of evidence that this kind of snooping produces more people in courts. What we do know is that in general you have, you know, these people, the people who are being spied on, know that they're being spied on, and the amount of data that's available about them is ever less and less. The MI5 in the UK are complaining that the surveillance systems that are now in place are getting more and more useless because the serious criminals know how to evade it. And this is routinely what happens.
TJ, I mean, why is the United States spying on the European Union, on Brussels? Is this on the war on terror? I mean, do we have to worry about the, I know a lot of people in the European Union don't like Brussels, but I mean, why does the United States have to spy on them?
I don't know. Presumably, the United States wants to gather information everywhere they can. I want to address something Jim said earlier.
Go ahead.
You said that the United States has found some sort of loophole in their law. Anytime someone complains about finding loopholes in the laws, what they really mean is that person is acting legally. And that's one of the big problems many people have with Snowden, this idea of calling him a whistleblower. You are called a whistleblower when you are typically pointing out illegality. There hasn't been any proof yet that what the United States did was in fact illegal within the United States.
What this loophole is.
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Think about what this loophole is. The United States Constitution guarantees privacy in the Fourth Amendment for its own citizens. You can't just simply go in and rifle through people's papers, seize goods, and so on without a warrant. But if you're not a United States citizen, the rights that United States citizens have don't apply to you. That's the loophole. Basically, a citizen of Europe, a member of the European Parliament, can be treated in exactly the same way as a North Korean spy, and that's outrageous.
TJ, adversary.
Definition of adversary. Be outrageous and illegal.
Okay, a definition of adversary. I think this is what Jim's getting at. Who's the adversary?
Well, something can be outrageous and not necessarily be illegal. So that's why I do have a bone to pick with the idea of calling Snowden a whistleblower. What he is somebody who was working for the government, took a vow of secrecy, then saw a policy he didn't like, and decided to reveal it to the world. That is what we do know is what he did was illegal. And I don't think whether you work for the government in Brussels or Great Britain or anywhere else, you want every single individual who works for the government making their own public policy on what they like and don't like, and if they don't like it, they will reveal it to the world. That simply is not a sustainable policy for any government.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, TJ, you're right, but you've got a problem here that both the UK and the American government are deciding for themselves what is legal and what is not. They're putting that into practice. They're doing that secretly. They're not revealing what their surveillance mechanisms, their mass surveillance mechanisms are. And then a very small number of people, a relatively small number of people, sworn to secrecy, know about it. And therefore, it's almost impossible to have a democratic debate about whether any of this is reasonable. I mean, it's true that a lot of what Edward Snowden revealed about the way that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the UK's use of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, the way that these acts are used, some of it was known or suspected. We did think that some of these big programs might well be going on, but it was all rumor and hearsay. It was little articles in specialist technical magazines. It wasn't on the front page of The Guardian. It wasn't in every news service. We weren't having discussions like this. We need to have discussions like this, even if we actually, in the end, agree with the programs that these governments have put forward. As I say, I don't think people will when they understand that they're being placed under suspicion and the amount of power that governments are accumulating over them. But we need to have that debate. If Edward Snowden was the only way for that to happen, and he realized that, then he has to make that moral judgment. If he's not going to be placed in the position where he has to make that moral judgment, then governments needed to have been responsible about what they tell the population in the first place, so that the people being sworn to secrecy were being sworn to secrecy because of operational reasons, that they weren't to reveal the actual people being investigated or the specifics of what intelligence agencies were doing to investigate specific crimes. He wasn't revealing any of that. He was just saying, here's the systemic situation. This is how these laws are being employed. This is the kind of information that is being gathered, and these are the means by which that's happening. And that's something we should have known in the first place.
Okay, TJ, so that sounds like a public service. Go ahead.
Well, I don't agree that Snowden is a hero, but I do agree with you that it is a good thing for open societies to have a debate on what is fair game in terms of surveillance and what is privacy. So even though I don't think Snowden is someone who should be turned into a hero, I do think it's a good idea that we're having a debate like this now.
Yeah, but
what did happen in the United States...
It took Snowden to have this debate, though. But it took Snowden to have this debate. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, he certainly sparked major interest in this. And what happened in the United States is after 9/11, the Bush administration, the Patriot Act, a lot of these things were rushed through, and then they were put into law, and then people sort of forgot about it. And Congress didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. The media didn't spend a lot of time talking about it. So I do think it is a good thing that we as a society are debating it. But I also think the media needs to do a better job of reporting actual facts. The average American thinks right now that the government is just sort of eavesdropping on every phone conversation willy-nilly. That's not what is happening.
We don't know if that's true, TJ. We don't know if that's true. We don't know if that's true, do we? We need more information, more debate. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I think what we do know is
Jim, before we go to the break, let me go to Jim. Let me go to Jim in London.
To collect the details of who is communicating with who. The U.S. government is collecting the details of who is communicating with who and when. And that is an extremely intrusive kind of information to store, and they weren't prepared to reveal that. And in fact, similar things happen in Europe, but at least in Europe, we had the public debate, and in fact, in a week or so's time, some of the laws governing that are under challenge in courts in Europe. So we have the chance of our court system and the human rights that we've written into law within Europe challenging some of this.
All right, gentlemen, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the ongoing surveillance scandal. Stay with RT.
I love
In his secret laboratory, Tim Kirby was able to build the world's most sophisticated robot, which unfortunately doesn't give a darn about anything. Tim's mission? To teach his creation why it should care about humans and world events. This is Why You Should Care.
Watch only on RT.com.
Do we speak your language? Want news, programs and documentaries in Spanish? What matters to you? Breaking news, alternative angles, hidden stories. Are you here? Then try RT Spanish. To find out more, visit actualidad.rt.com.
Download the official RT application to your cell phone, choose your language, stream quality, and enjoy your favorites from RT.
If you're away from your television, well, it just doesn't matter. Now with your mobile device, you can watch RT anytime, anywhere.
I love it.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing global information dominance. Okay, TJ in New York, I'd like to go back to you. NSA Director General Keith Alexander says his agency is incapable of determining how many Americans have their calls and emails invaded by the agency without warrants. I mean, do you find that troublesome? I mean, here's the head of this agency, and he can't tell you, the eavesdropping without warrants. I mean, shouldn't he know that?
Ideally, sure, it would be nice for him to know that.
Or is the number so big? Is the number so big?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's 2. Again, we can speculate. Everyone from their own bias can speculate in their favor. As Jim just said, we don't really know if the government is listening on everybody's phone calls. By that same logic, though, I could say you don't know if the government has foiled 50 major attempts to have dirty bombs go off in major cities. And if it weren't for this program, we would have dirty bombs going off everywhere in major American cities. So this logic of saying, well, because we don't know, we're going to assume the worst can work both ways.
Okay, Jim, but that's why we have checks and balances, don't we? That's why we have government and society. And trust, ultimately that word trust. And this is what this is all really about. Who do you trust?
Yeah, so there are 2 things here. Firstly, the American government has been shown to be keeping the metadata about calls, who you talk to. That's what we do know. We also know that the UK government is recording everything that it can get its hands on as it traverses between the UK and the United States, and that will include a lot of people's calls and emails and so on being recorded for at least 3 or 4 days. Now, on the question of trust, the only way we can really have trust is by being completely transparent about what these programs involve. And the problem we have with the American FISA Act is that it just says we'll have secret programs to gather information about foreign people for foreign intelligence purposes, or in the case of the Patriot Act, we'll secretly seize information.
But Jim, hang on, Jim. How can
letters, and nobody's allowed to know what these things are about. And that's why PRISM.
Jim, how can you be?
Nobody knows exactly what's going on, and the companies aren't allowed to tell us what's going on either.
We'll go to companies in a second. TJ, go ahead. TJ, jump in. This is Crosstalk. Go right ahead.
Jim, how can you possibly be a government trying to foil the secret attempts of terrorists trying to cause a secret attack on a country? How can you possibly be transparent on that? If you are transparent, you make it easier for terrorists to do what they need to do. That's the whole point of having these things as secret.
Jim, do you want to reply?
Yeah, so this is the confusion in the debate. We have a question about the broad nature of the programs. Do we take everything we can get our hands on and put it in a massive database or data center in the middle of a desert? That's one kind of question. The other question is, are we putting under surveillance a specific group of people who we believe may be plotting to do something criminal? Now, that latter thing, I agree, you can't discuss that in public. But the former thing, do we build some massive data center to warehouse everybody's information? Or do we put taps on cables running across the Atlantic and just store everything we possibly can for up to a month? Yeah, we can have a public debate about that. And in fact, it's essential that we do, because if we don't have that debate before these programs start, people like Edward Snowden will come along and reveal that information.
TJ, good point there. I mean, if we don't have a real debate here, we're going to get more Snowdens, don't you think?
Well, we definitely need to have a debate, and I think Jim hit on an important point of a matter of trust. And again, this depends on where you sit. If I were someone who lived in the Middle East, or a leader in the Middle East or Central Asia, I would be very distrustful of the U.S. government. I would not like this policy at all. But I can tell you, as an American, as other people who live in America, when it comes to who do I trust more, even though I don't love everything the government does, I fundamentally do trust the government not to listen to my conversation and then call up and say, hey, we heard you doing something perverted or nasty, so we're now going to extort you for your entire net worth. I trust the government not to do that. Whereas I do not trust terrorists and other people who hate America, perhaps for good reason, to not attack America. So that's why I'm in favor of using the government to try to track these people and try to figure out before they launch bombs or attacks.
Okay, TJ, do you trust James Clapper? How about Mr. Clapper? Do you trust Mr. Clapper? He lied. He perjured himself. And everyone wants to go after Snowden, okay, but at the same time, Clapper perjured himself in front of Congress. He should be removed. He should be fired immediately.
But what does that have to do with the bigger issue of, in the United States, we are a big target. We're the most loved country in the world, but we're also the most hated country in the world.
He was asked under oath
and a lot
in front
of
of a congressional committee.
Us.
Does that give him the right to lie?
What?
Does that give him the right to lie?
Nobody has the right to lie, and nobody has the right to dismantle the entire security apparatus of a country because you don't like what one person said either. That's that's as irrelevant as me saying. Hang on a second. Hang on one second. That is irrelevant. That is irrelevant as me saying you can't trust Snowden because he's a libertarian. He's now aligned himself with totalitarian regimes and going to places like China, which are notoriously
But Mr. Clapper is someone that we're supposed to trust.
Look,
we're supposed to trust him. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
We've got to go back to the point about, do we trust intelligence services? Do intelligence services abuse their power? And I think that the simple answer to that is yes, they do. From time to time, they absolutely do. And the more power they have, the more potential they have for abusing it. The more that we don't know about the power, the more the potential is for them to do it on the quiet. We've seen, Richard Nixon in the States, it's an obvious example, but in the United Kingdom right now, we've just seen the idea of the police defining for themselves what a domestic extremist is, using essentially kind of terrorist kind of powers against these people, and they're just environmental protesters, and they've been put under directed surveillance for a number of years. A number of those individuals doing the surveillance have had children with these people, and very, very innocent people who've been themselves mishandled by the police. They've also been put under surveillance by the police in order to discredit them. The people with surveillance powers abuse them. It does happen. Also in the UK, we've seen collaboration between these kinds of covert operations and the media to hand over information to them, essentially to sell newspapers. We're all vulnerable to this kind of abuse once the powers are there. That's why they should be restricted and used against people who are genuinely serious criminals who are plotting dreadful things, rather than sweeping up everybody's information on the off chance, because then you're putting everybody at this kind of risk.
But we don't have any evidence. But we don't have any evidence in the United States that this information is being used other than trying to go after criminals and terrorists. This is in stark contrast to a lot of the history of the United States, where you had J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, putting the technology of his time, a tape recorder, under the bed of Martin Luther King Jr. to try to extort him and to try to have pressure over political opponents. This is not the same thing as
but TJ, why don't you want to apply that logic?
You're absolutely right, though. You're absolutely right on one thing, that when you give surveillance power to the government, there is absolutely the potential for abuse. It is a question of balance. What do you fear more? Do you fear abuse from the government more, or do you fear abuse from terrorists or outside forces? At this particular moment in history,
very simplistic. Go ahead, Jim.
Go ahead, Jim. More Americans fear the terrorists.
Jump in.
This isn't. You're putting forward a kind of dichotomy that doesn't really exist. The question is, we do fear terrorists. We do need to investigate them. What are the ways that we can do that are appropriate, that don't hand huge powers that are unnecessary to the people doing the surveillance, that would open people up for unwarranted abuse? The question is about being targeted and understanding why you're investigating people and what you need to do that, rather than saying, let's just sweep up everything because we might find some stuff. That's the approach we've got now, and it's not reasonable.
Okay, TJ, what do you think? I mean,
but you don't know, Jim, that it's not necessary. You don't know what's necessary. I don't necessarily know what's necessary. The inherent to the nature of intelligence is you gather as many facts as you can, and then you try to piece things together to try to foil terrorist plots.
Yeah, but
so you don't really
NSA
know what's necessary or what's unwarranted.
99% of the information they're gathering is completely irrelevant. We know most of this information is completely irrelevant.
Maybe it's 99.999%.
Yeah, exactly. All that information is of no use whatsoever. So why are we gathering it? I really seriously don't think that that information is never going to be put to any use, or isn't even now being put to use, that we wouldn't appreciate. The laws in FISA particularly are extraordinarily broad. They're there to for the US to use for any foreign policy reason, and that means that legally the position is that if I am doing something that the United States doesn't like complaining about their foreign policy, like saying that I don't think that the UK and the US should get involved in a new war somewhere, that puts me on a potential target list. And if the United States wants to gather information, they have the legal powers to do that. There is no bar whatsoever. I don't feel I'm a terrorist, and I don't feel that I should be placed in that position.
Okay, TJ, 20 seconds to get the last word of the program.
Let me answer your question.
20 seconds, go ahead.
You're saying you don't know if it's necessary, and it very well may be necessary. 99% may be irrelevant. Sometimes that 1% is the intelligence needed to stop terrorists.
All right, on that, gentlemen, thank you very much. Many thanks to my guests in New York and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.
I love it.